Good evening and welcome. My name is Bob Ellis and I'm the program director here at the Natural History Institute. And I'd like to make a handful of announcements before we get started. The first announcement is an announcement of recognition. I would like for the people who are the recent graduates of the Mogollon Highlands Naturalist Certification Program to stand up, please. Yes. The Naturalist Certification Program is a joint project between us, the Natural History Institute, and the Highlands Center for Natural History. And it's something that we hope to do in the future as well. So welcome to you all, and special right on. A couple other announcements. I'd like to make folks aware of a national conference that we're planning next year that we're hosting at the Mago Retreat in Sedona. And conference is called, and instead of a conference, we're calling it a confluence. Reciprocal healing, nature, health, and wild vitality. And the whole intention of the conference is to make more well known the healing power of nature and kind of the reciprocal relationship between humans and that healing power. I would also like to announce that registration for our Touchstone tour to Ecuador has just opened. That tour is called Ecuador Bright Islands Deep Forest, and that takes place January 22nd to February the 7th. I have some inside information on registration on this. The registration is filling up pretty quickly, as it has done in the past 2 years where we have hosted this event. And so if you're interested, you'll find information about that and the conference in the entryway on a table. So I think that's it. Oh, one other thing. If you like the speaker series, and if you like what we're doing here at the Natural History Institute, there's plenty of opportunities to donate. As a matter of fact, there's a little jar on the table there in the lobby. You could donate there, or you can donate online. So in ecology, there's a phrase you hear often: energy flows and nutrients cycle. This simply means that energy is on a one-way trip to deep space as it passes through the Earth's biota, and nutrients are on a seemingly endless treadmill as they loop through life. Natural history has long marveled at the complex interaction of biota engaged in the flow of energy and the cycling of nutrients. Tonight, we get the great benefit of hearing from a person who has peered deeply into the role of one taxa in this great dance of life, and that taxa is turtles. I think you're going to be fascinated by what he has to say. Dr. Jeff Lovich is a research ecologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, Southwest Biological Science Center in Flagstaff. He earned his PhD from the University of Georgia's Institute of Ecology. Jeff has a passion for turtles and has studied their ecology and systematics for over 35 years, and during that time he's authored over 175 scientific papers and 4 books, including a book titled Turtles of the United States and Canada. He was a Fulbright Scholar in Morocco in 2008. He is also an elected fellow of the Linnaean Society of London, the world's oldest active biological society. So I would like for all of you to join me in welcoming Jeff.
Thank you, and thank you to Tom and Bob for inviting me. I had never heard of this organization until I got the email asking if I would come down and speak to you, but it resonated with me because I'm a natural historian too, and my career path was greatly influenced by my experiences in nature. And I understand that my good friend Matt Frankel had something to do with this as well. And I had the distinct pleasure of going over and seeing his turtle and tortoise collection today with his wife and their keeper showing me the collection. So I'm primed. I'm ready to talk about turtles. I hope you're ready to hear about them. So I've studied turtles for a long time. I am very passionate about it. I think that anything worth doing is worth overdoing. And so I've tried to do that all my life. I've been fascinated with turtles ever since I was a 6-year-old boy. And it started with my father driving from where we lived in Northern Virginia out to southern Maryland. And occasionally he'd see box turtles crossing the road, and he'd pick them up from time to time and bring them home. And I got hooked, and it's just because of that opportunity for a child to experience the wonder of nature up close. And that's what natural history should strive to do, because we have a lot of kids that are growing up in a nature-free, wildlife-free world of video games and things that I just don't understand. But anyway, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey and why I am passionate about turtles. So these are questions that people have asked me repeatedly during my 35-year career. Sometimes people think it's almost funny. Oh, you study turtles, you know, that's cute. You know, why don't you study lions or water buffalo or something like that? And the other question is, why are turtles important? Who cares? So what? You know, I hear this from people regularly. And so a few years ago, I decided, you know what? I'm getting toward the end of my career. I need to write this down. I need to have answers to these questions. And that way I can show people, okay, see, I wrote this. This is the answer. But this is what we're going to ponder tonight. So last October, I published this article in the journal Bioscience called Where Have All the Turtles Gone and Why Does It Matter? In an attempt to try and answer those two questions. And I hope that you'll leave here tonight feeling like you know the answers to those questions. So, why do I study turtles? Well, when I'm asked that question, a lot of times I put on my scientist hat and come up with kind of technical responses so that I can help the National Park Service at Joshua Tree National Park where I work, or some other place like the Bureau of Land Management in Palm Springs, so I can help them better manage and understand the desert tortoise or some other species. I might say, well, didn't you know tortoises as a lineage are over 200 million years old? That's pretty impressive. They survived the extinction of the dinosaurs, which happened 65.5 million years ago. Turtles were already old hat when this happened, and they cruised right through. Did you know that many species of turtles and tortoises have environmental sex determination? They don't have XX, XY genetic sex determination with chromosomes like we do and our dogs and other animals familiar to us. Incubation temperature of eggs determines the sex of many species, with cool temperatures producing males generally and warm temperatures producing females. Did you know that turtles can store viable sperm for years? A female can mate once and lay fertile clutches of eggs for several years thereafter without another encounter with a male. We all know that turtles have a reputation for living a long time, right? How long? We don't really know. I can say that some species can live to 80, 100, maybe more than 100 years. That's pretty well authenticated in the literature. But that's remarkable because if you look at longevity as a function of body size in animals, small things have short lifespans. Big things, giraffes, whales, humans, horses, cows, elephants, they have long lifespans. For an animal like a Sonora mud turtle, which is one of the native species here in Arizona that is about that big, to live 50 or more years, and I have marked animals that I know are that old, that's remarkable. Did you know that turtles can hold their breath for months at a time? Think about painted turtles and snapping turtles that live in southern Canada or in northern Minnesota and Michigan. They have to hibernate under many feet of ice some years when the winters are really cold. They have no access to atmospheric oxygen. In fact, western painted turtles have the greatest potential for surviving anoxic conditions of any vertebrate animal known. And this has important implications for human aging because there's some connection between anoxia tolerance and brain vitality and longevity. So turtles are good models for studying aging. Also, other species of turtles can breathe through their cloaca. They don't have to come to the surface of the water and take a breath through their nostrils or their mouth. They actually use their cloaca, which is highly vascularized with lots of capillaries like a gill. They're essentially breathing through their anus. Did you know that the U.S. has more species of turtles than any other country? Anybody know what number 2 is? First, I'll tell you this. There's 60 species in the United States. The next most speciose country, any guess? Mexico, 37. So what are some other reasons for studying or conserving turtles? I just gave you the scientist answers, right? A lot of my friends would walk away, kind of scratch their head, okay, yeah, that's why you study turtles. But this is why I study turtles. Anybody ever seen that viral video on YouTube of the little kid that says, I like turtles? Google or go on YouTube tonight, type in I like turtles. You'll see the video. It's hysterical. But when I was a graduate student, people would frequently come up to me. There were other graduate students or faculty. So what's your research project? Blah, blah, blah. What are you working on? Turtles. Why? I like turtles. Well, that was the wrong answer. The right answer was turtles are really important model organisms for investigating hypotheses that are of evolutionary or ecological significance. I stopped saying that years ago. I like turtles. This is another good reason for studying turtles. 60% of the world's 360 species are critically endangered and facing extinction. I'm going to give you some examples of those species here in a few minutes. Arizona, by the way, has 7 species of native turtles, more than any state west of the Continental Divide. 7 turtles is not that big a deal, but when you consider we're in the arid Southwest, that's pretty good. Mississippi has about 27. Here's some other reasons for studying turtles. Turtles are beautiful animals. They have as much right to be here as anything else, and they're interesting animals for a variety of reasons, some of which I've already mentioned. Then there are legal requirements, like the Endangered Species Act or state laws that protect wildlife. And they also have value to humans, for food, for pets, purported medicinal uses in Asia that have not been shown to be scientifically defensible, tourism value. Think of the Galapagos. I mean, huge, huge tourism industry. So turtles have real value. And with this backdrop, why not turtles? They're just remarkable creatures. Look at this beautiful eastern box turtle from Virginia. Some of the most spectacular animals in the world. Some of the tortoises that I saw at the Frankel collection look like living jewels. They're just spectacular. This is a diamondback terrapin, the only turtle in the world that lives its entire life at the brackish interface between freshwater and saltwater. It's found from Cape Cod, Massachusetts, all the way around the Atlantic coast to Corpus Christi, Texas in the Gulf. Once the most economically important reptile in the world, but you'll have to invite me back for that story. This is a ringed sawback turtle found only in Mississippi and Louisiana in one river. If there were a toxic spill in that river, by the way, this is a federally threatened species under the Endangered Species Act, you could wipe out this entire species. This is a Central American wood turtle, photographed in Sonora, Mexico, just showing you some of the beauty and diversity of turtles. This is a spotted turtle from Ohio, spectacular creature. Because of their beauty, their ease of keeping as pets and whatnot, these things have enormous demand and sometimes enormous value in the pet trade. People will pay tens of thousands of dollars for some of these turtle species. And when something has a price on its head that high, it's really hard to protect it. So, let's shift gears. I'm an ecologist, and the central thesis of this paper that I wrote with my colleagues about why are turtles important is looking at their ecological value. Everything fits in a niche and performs a role that helps other species or helps facilitate processes of energy flow or nutrient cycling, just like Bob was talking about. This is the worth attributed to, in this case, turtles in terms of their benefits to the environment. This is the so what. Why are turtles important? So the objective in this paper was to bring attention to the global plight of turtles, which I hope I've convinced you of right now with the fact that 60% of the 360 species are facing extinction. And I want to talk about what we would lose from an ecological standpoint if we take them out. You've all heard the analogy probably of an ecosystem being like a tapestry, and you can only pull so many threads out of the tapestry before the whole thing falls apart. Well, turtles play very important roles in all of these areas that we're going to talk about in more detail during this presentation. So, let's talk a little bit more about the plight of turtles. Extinction is happening right now in real time. This is a plowshare tortoise from Madagascar. There may be only 200 to 300 of these left in the world. Many of them were brought into a facility to be protected in Madagascar, and armed poachers broke in and stole many of them. They sell on the black market for tens or more thousands of dollars. And so one of the things that people have done to try and arrest the illegal trade in these species is actually taking Dremels and carving huge numbers in their shells so that a poacher would think twice before it took it, because you'd be advertising the fact that you stole a protected animal. And you don't have to go to Madagascar to find turtles in trouble. The Mojave desert tortoise, which is found in western Arizona, California, Nevada, and southern Utah, is a federally protected species under the Endangered Species Act. It was listed as threatened in 1990. Some respected colleagues of mine have done surveys of tortoises throughout the listed range and found from 2004 to 2014, over 120,000 tortoises have died. They've died because of strikes from vehicles, poaching, ravens, coyotes, both of which are subsidized predators that do very well around human resources, swimming pools, garbage cans, those sorts of things, and they're fierce predators of many desert animals. This despite the fact that it's protected by the strongest ecological law in the world, the Endangered Species Act. They're now listed on the top 25 plus most endangered turtles in the world. So this is right here at home. This is Lonesome George, the last Pinta Island Galapagos tortoise in the world who disappeared. He died in 2012. He was put in with females of various other races of Galapagos tortoises, but he didn't seem to have any interest. He died in 2012. I was in the Galapagos at his funeral. It was very touching. The children of Puerto Ayora, the main town in the Galapagos, had a big parade carrying signs how they're going to miss Lonesome George. And so it's happening. More recently, last month, the last known female Yangtze River giant softshell turtle died. She was in captivity at the Suzhou Zoo in China, and there were 3 males known in the world. And they tried to put her in with one male, and for 8 years she produced infertile eggs. The last 2 years they tried in vitro fertilization because things just weren't happening. And it was very difficult. My colleague, there's a scientist named Gero Kukling in Australia that's an expert on turtle reproductive tracts. He did the work, but there's no medical book you can open up on how to do in vitro fertilization of a Yangtze River giant softshell turtle. So it didn't work for whatever reason. And unless somebody discovers a new female, this species is functionally extinct because there's only 3 males left. They've been doing extensive environmental DNA testing of rivers and lakes throughout China and northern Vietnam where this species formerly occurred, and they haven't found any. So things look really grim, and it's just amazing when you think of something that big is potentially gone forever. This is a Burmese roof tortoise. It was thought to be extinct. It was rediscovered about 20 years ago. Less than a dozen animals were taken out of rivers in Burma, taken to the zoo, and captive propagation facilities were set up. And now there's over 1,000 of them, and they're being reintroduced into the wild. But the problem with reintroducing many of these species into the wild is unless you remove the thing that caused them to get close to extinction in the first place, you're just throwing them into a meat grinder. So this is really hard work. Once you get a species to numbers this low, it's hard to recover them. So that's the state of turtles today. Let's talk about the state of turtles 100, 200, 300 years ago. What we call the pre-Anthropocene, because I think we'd all pretty much agree that we live in an era where people are the dominant force on the planet. Turtles used to have massive population sizes, just unbelievable, and I'll show you a picture of one example. And of course they had correspondingly high biomasses. That meant pounds of turtle per acre was very high in the ecosystems that they occupied. They were distributed widely across the planet, oceans, freshwater, terrestrial habitats, and important ecological roles were being fulfilled. Here's an example of a large aggregation of turtles. These are called olive ridley turtles. This is off the coast of India. This is called an aribata, excuse me. An aribata is a huge aggregation of nesting female turtles that crawl up onto a beach when the lunar cycle and the tides are at a certain condition. They all come up and nest like this. This is documented elsewhere in the world too, particularly the west coast of Mexico. And sometimes they literally dig up each other's nests and eggs are being thrown in the air. It's just an unbelievable number of turtles. But this is the kind of thing that existed in the pre-Anthropocene in other habitats as well. So let's talk a little bit more about biomass. This is something that ecologists like me get excited about. Biomass is a really easy way to measure not only how much animal or plant material is on the landscape, but how important it is in ecological transfer of nutrients and energy flow. So notice these have two separate scales. This is the low scale up here. So you can see big things like carnivorous lions actually have pretty low biomass. They're never more common or higher biomass than their prey species. They couldn't be because they couldn't subsist that way. But as you go up the continuum here, what you see is a little trend. Reptiles tend to have higher biomasses than many similar size or small mammals. And that's because reptiles have such a slow metabolism. They're, quote, cold-blooded, which is not really true. They're ectotherms. They modify their temperatures according to their needs in the environment. But then we switch up to a much bigger scale, and you can see reptiles are still playing pretty significant roles. But even big herbivorous mammals, they don't hold a candle. The highest biomass champions in the world are tortoises. Animals that live on Aldabra Atoll, the Aldabra giant tortoise, almost 600 kilograms per hectare. That's a lot of tortoise flesh on the land. And this is a record from a South Carolina farm pond for red-eared slider turtles. Just a phenomenal number, over 877 kilograms per hectare. That's a lot of turtles. Turtles really know how to throw their weight around. So why is turtle biomass so high? They can achieve very high population sizes if allowed to, if left alone, not over-harvesting by people, etc. Many species like the tortoises on Aldabra Atoll or the Galapagos Islands achieve very large body sizes, and they have overlapping generations in longevity. You can have 5 or 6 generations of tortoises coexisting in the same habitat because they can live 80 or 100 years or maybe more. And they also have the low metabolic rate that I talked about. In fact, a colleague of mine who was working on his PhD at UCLA estimated that a 10-pound tortoise used as much energy metabolically in a year as a 10-pound mammal like a cat would use in 3.3 days. That's the difference in metabolism between reptiles and mammals. So they can have really high biomasses because you don't need a lot of food to sustain that biomass with that level of metabolism. Let's talk about energy and nutrient transfer across boundaries. So this is an example of an ecosystem boundary between an aquatic system and a terrestrial system. And turtles play very important roles in energy transfer and nutrient transfer. Another colleague of mine studied sea turtles in Florida and estimated that there were over 14,000 loggerhead sea turtle nests along a 21-kilometer stretch of beach in 1996 that contained an estimated 1.6 million eggs. You can easily calculate how much energy is in an egg by putting it in a device called a bomb calorimeter and measuring how many calories are stored in that egg. And what she did was calculate how much of that energy goes into various compartments, and you can see that only about 25%, only about a quarter of the energy that left the ocean to go onto the beach went back to the ocean as hatchlings. The other 75% was either lost as metabolic heat, went to scavengers, or went into the food web of detritivores and decomposers that live in the sand. In fact, another scientific paper has documented the fact that the little tiny microorganisms and invertebrates that live in the sand, they're called myofauna, are different next to a turtle nest than they are without a turtle nest. So a turtle nest actually creates its own ecosystem. So turtles are very important in transferring nutrients. Many of you have probably seen the documentaries with all the seabirds coming out of the ocean and nesting on cliffs and whatnot. Thousands and thousands of them. That's the same level of nutrient transfer that's happening in turtles that happens in birds. So they're very important in that regard. They also have value for keeping our rivers and lakes clean because turtles eat a lot of things that are dead, at least the carnivorous species do. Very few species of turtles are able to catch live fish. In the South, you hear people shooting turtles all the time because they eat fish. But yeah, dead fish. There's very few species that can catch a live fish. But one biologist studied a community of 3 species of Australian turtles that had a diet that was 20% carrion, and in his study area, he estimated the turtles ate 430 tons of carrion per day. That's material that would otherwise be left in the river to rot, decompose, take the oxygen out of the water, cause fish kills, algae blooms, etc. So turtles have a very important role in scavenging. In fact, along the Ghats in India, like cities like Varanasi, where they burn corpses and dump them in the river when they're done, they're not always well done. Sometimes the corpses go in the river less than well done. And the Indian government spent millions of dollars in the early 90s setting up breeding facilities for soft-shell turtles whose populations were greatly depleted in the Ganges River to get some more scavengers back in the system, because without the scavengers, you have a lot of carrion. So Bob mentioned nutrient cycling. Let's talk about that a little bit. Turtles are 82% dry mass bone by virtue of the fact that they have a shell. In fact, if you think about it, turtles are the only animals alive today or ever who have a bony shell that holds their shoulders and their hips. No other animal has ever had that morphology. It's remarkable. If we knew them only from fossils, we would marvel at them and say, how could this possibly be? How could anything live like that? So bone is composed of calcium and phosphorus and other things, but turtles have very high assimilation rates for calcium, particularly when they're growing, because they have to get bigger and their shell has to get stronger to withstand predation. And phosphorus in turtle bones can actually be a resource for organisms in phosphorus-limited systems. Many systems are not calcium-limited. That's not usually important, but there were some studies done in southern Africa in the 1940s where there was a disease that caused paralysis of the hind limbs of cattle. It was called ychy, and they didn't know exactly what it was, but they suspected they'd seen some cows that were eating the bones of some dead tortoises, and they thought, well, gee, maybe that has something to do with it. So they devised an experiment where they took dead tortoises and allowed them to putrefy, and then it took some of the liquid out of them and injected them into cows, and they sterilized others, and they had controls and all this stuff. And sure enough, the cows that were receiving injections of putrefied tortoise got sick. They got the disease. And it turns out the disease was caused by botulism bacteria that were growing in the dead tortoise, but the cows were eating the tortoise because there was not enough phosphorus in the plants or the soil to meet their metabolic or their nutritional needs. So that's one example of turtles affecting things of importance to people in terms of mineral cycling. Turtles have really important trophic positions. That's an ecological way of saying that they have really important positions in the food web or the food chain, whatever you want to call it. One study done on Aldabra Atoll in the Indian Ocean estimated that in a population of 150,000 tortoises, which is about almost 4,500 tortoises per square kilometer, tortoises eat about 12 million kilograms of forage a year. And if you assume an assimilation efficiency where they actually digest and break down about 50% of that, that means that 6 million kilograms of tortoise was produced every year as a result of all those animals eating 12 million kilograms of grass. They have such an impact on the ecosystem of that atoll that they call the environment tortoise turf, because the tortoises just mow it down constantly. It's just like a putting green. So let's talk about another example. This is a salt marsh in South Carolina where I worked. In fact, this is the longest study in the world on diamondback terrapins. We've done it now for 38 years. In this salt marsh, I'll point out a few things. This is called the Kiowa River. Anybody ever hear of Kiowa Island? 2 PGA golf courses, it's a really pretty place. But anyway, they got beautiful salt marshes. This dune here separates the river from the Atlantic Ocean. The Atlantic Ocean's about 200 yards away from that. Diamondback terrapins, that pretty little whitish gray turtle I showed you at the beginning, they live in this habitat. I'll show you another one. And this salt marsh is composed primarily of cordgrass. Now, why is this salt marsh important for us? When we have hurricanes and storm surge, these salt marshes help keep the water out away from where human development is. You take this grass away, and now you've got a mud flat that's just ready for tidal surges to come and inundate Charleston and other areas. The other thing is these tidal marshes are incredibly important nurseries for things like redfish, crabs, shrimp, a lot of things that we like to eat. So, you've got the diamondback terrapin. this is an important predator of these salt marsh periwinkle snails that are about the size of your little pinky fingernail, and they're fungivores. What they do is they crawl up and down these spartina stems, the cordgrass, as the tide ebbs and flows, and the tide's about 6 foot twice a day, up and down, and they drill holes into the cordgrass, and that causes a fungus to grow on it, and then the snails come back and they eat it. Well, if you didn't have predators like blue crabs and diamondback terrapins to eat these salt marsh periwinkles, you'd have a lot of damage to this cordgrass. In fact, this is an X-radiograph I took of a terrapin. You can see all the crushed shells of the salt marsh periwinkles in their gut. She's also got eggs. See the eggs? So there was a study that was done where they made enclosures in the salt marsh, and they made sure there were no crabs, no terrapins, and they took all the snails out of some and left the snails in others. With no predators to keep the salt marsh periwinkle snail numbers down, they turned it into a barren mudflat in 8 months. So without diamondback terrapins and blue crabs in these marshes, there's no black and redfish, and we better get ready to buy hurricane insurance. Turtles are also very important in terms of seed dispersal and germination enhancement. There are many seeds of different species of plants that require some form of scarification before they'll germinate. Either the seed coat has to be cracked or digested enough that it thins where the embryonic plant can come out. Studies have shown that Galapagos tortoise can average 464 seeds of 2.8 plant species per defecation event. Not only are they enhancing the germination, but they're also transporting the seed to other areas and giving it a dose of fertilizer at the same time. The same thing has been shown for Opuntia cactus that pass through the digestive tracts of Texas tortoises. They have higher germination rates. And the lowly eastern box turtle that I grew up with, my introduction to herpetology, is the only known seed dispersal agent for mayapple. Does anybody know what a mayapple is? Back east, it's like a harbinger of spring. When you see mayapples, you knew spring was around the corner. It's a beautiful little umbrella-type plant that germinates in wetlands, and box turtles are the only thing we know that germinates those. Now, this is really interesting. Turtles are even being used to restore ecosystems. In the Galapagos, many of the low hot islands were dominated by grasslands that had these giant tree Opuntia cactus in them. But tortoise populations have been decimated in the Galapagos, starting in probably the 1700s through the 1800s, even into the early 1900s. Ships would stop there. Sailors are tired of eating hardtack and salt pork and whatever else they had on the ship. This was fresh meat, so they'd load up with tortoises. It's estimated that over 500,000 tortoises were removed from the Galapagos during that era. That's a lot of tortoises. Some islands were essentially defaunated of tortoises. They're gone, like Lonesome George. But what's happened on some of these islands is, without having these giant 500 and 600 pound bulldozers to mow down the shrubs, they're changing from grasslands to shrublands. And this is cause for concern. Now, on some of the islands, I was in the Galapagos in 2014, and I found out that we don't really know what the correct genetic form of tortoise is to put on some of these islands, but we know that we need to get some kind of a tortoise out there because it's becoming a shrubland. It's not going to be a grassland with these tree Opuntia anymore if we don't get tortoises back. And so what they've done is taken excess common species of Galapagos tortoises at the Darwin station, and they sterilize them through castration and put them back on the islands as ecological surrogates so that one day when they figure out what the correct genetic race of Galapagos tortoise was for that island, they'll be able to put them back without worrying about contamination through crossbreeding. That's also happening on Indian Ocean islands, where a very small number of tortoises survived the ravages of whaling ships in earlier centuries. In fact, on one of the Indian Ocean islands, there was a plant species that they thought became very rare in modern times because it was eaten by dodo birds, which went extinct long before many of the tortoise species did there. And more recent research suggests, no, it wasn't a dodo, it was a tortoise. And so tortoises have a very important role in maintaining some of these ecosystems as well, by virtue of their dominance in numbers. Let's talk about something that ecologists also get excited about called bioturbation, animals digging holes, basically. This is one of my study animals with some epoxy on the shell to hold a radio transmitter in place just south of Joshua Tree National Park, doing a little bit of house cleaning in the spring. This is really important. Soil turnover is a very important process that's facilitated mostly by animals, including things like earthworms. Late in his career, Darwin wrote a book on the importance of earthworms in turning over soil in Great Britain, and I forget the exact number, but he made an estimate of how many years it took for earthworms to turn over the first foot of soil in England, and it was really a short period of time. It was surprising. So when animals dig these holes in the ground, they're providing an ecological service. They're allowing atmospheric gases to penetrate into the soil horizon, water to infiltrate in, and they're bringing nutrients to the surface as well. Let me give you an example of that. Well, first, let me show you how complex these burrows are. This is a publication showing burrows of gopher tortoises in Florida, which is a closely related species to our own desert tortoise. And you can see the gopher tortoise burrows are in turquoise, and then there's a mouse species that makes these little purple side burrows, and all these dark blue things here are collapsed burrow segments. You can see how complex these burrows are. So these animals are playing a really critical role in turning over the soil and providing habitat for other species. In fact, this is a photograph of one of my tortoise burrows at the study site near Palm Springs. And you can see that when the tortoise excavated this burrow, he's bringing up a completely different soil horizon. You might think, well, what good is that? There's a bighorn sheep at a mineral lick in front of a tortoise burrow getting the nutrients that the tortoise brought to the surface. This is also in Palm Springs. I thought that was amazing when I saw that. Many species of animals that don't usually dig their own burrows use tortoise burrows. This burrowing owl thought he'd take over this tortoise's burrow near Palm Springs, but the tortoise had other ideas, and he just basically bulldozed the owl out of the way. Owls can dig their own holes, but they like to take advantage of free ones if they can get them. So the gopher tortoise in the southeastern United States is a real champion as far as providing home for other species, some of which are endangered as well, like gopher frogs. Eastern diamondback rattlesnakes are a declining species. In fact, to date, there it is, almost 400 species of animals have been documented to live in gopher tortoise burrows as squatters, basically. And like I said, many of those can't dig burrows on their own. So the gopher tortoise is what you would call a keystone species. It has a disproportionately important role in the ecosystem. If you took the gopher tortoises away, where are these 360 species of animals going to live? You might lose them all. So, we're going to wind down a little bit. I think I've convinced you, I hope, that turtle populations are declining worldwide and species are being lost while we sit here. We buried one last month, essentially. Turtles are important. They have ecological value, and we can even use them to restore degraded ecosystems if we're smart about how to do it. But this has really puzzled me, that turtles don't seem to get the recognition that I think they should get, at least from recognizing their imperiled status. And they're lagging behind other charismatic species. Everybody's worried about polar bears and melting Arctic, and we should be, right? But you don't hear much about turtles. So I pondered this long and hard. Why does society tend to overlook turtles? One is what I call taxonomic chauvinism. We like fuzzy things, big things, things that look more like us than a turtle. Reptiles are generally reviled, but the one thing turtles have going for them, they're the one reptile that's universally loved. People are scared to death of snakes, crocodiles eat people, lizards, I like them all, but don't get me wrong. But reptiles don't get the love they deserve sometimes. Another thing is the shifting baseline, and this is a really easy concept to understand. You're born into a world and you think that's normal because you don't know what came before you. So the example I use is, how many in the audience, raise your hand, woke up saying, man, I really miss those flocks of passenger pigeons that blocked out the sky for days at a time? Nobody, because we don't know it. Well, this guy knew it. Good for you. You're the first one I've seen raise their hand. But that's the shifting baseline. The young people we're trying to get interested in natural history think that a world with very few turtles is normal. They need to know it's not. They need to know what's been lost. The other thing is what I call the perception of persistence, and I'm going to have to use a graph to explain this to you. So let's say we'll use an example of an alligator snapping turtle, which lives in the southeastern United States, nowhere else in the world. Let's say a female deposits a clutch of eggs in 1975, and it takes 15 years for those females to mature, come back and maybe nest in 1990. And then there's more, and there's more. And you're standing at this beach every year. You go down to look for the turtles, and the turtles are coming. You don't think there's anything wrong with it. But say in 1990, all the females are killed, or their nesting habitat is destroyed, or all the eggs are collected and eaten by predators or humans or whatever. All of a sudden, there's no more turtles. And so because they can live so long, and many species take so long to mature, it takes decades before we recognize there's a problem. Basically, if there's nothing coming behind in terms of recruitment, that population is walking dead. And many turtle populations have gotten to that point, like the Yangtze River giant softshell turtle. So in Hindu cosmology, this is for my friend here, the view is that the world is supported on the backs of elephants standing on a turtle. And you've all heard the question, what's the turtle standing on? All the way down, that's right, exactly. Turtles have really been doing their share of heavy lifting in terms of providing ecological services, doing things that we take for granted. And so many other animals are doing the same thing. They're fulfilling important ecological roles in germination enhancement, nutrient flow, etc. And if we take that for granted, we're going to lose it. So unfortunately, at the end of the paper, we concluded that the collapse of turtle populations on a global scale is diminishing their ecological role. And for whatever reason, we don't seem to be recognizing it well enough. So thank you for your attention. Assume there's time for questions. Yes?
About the loss of the turtle species, isn't it true that when a species gets below, say, 100 individuals, there's a lot of inbreeding? And doesn't that lead then to non-viable offspring?
It can, yeah.
Problem.
Yeah, it's called a genetic. Yeah, it's called a genetic bottleneck, and it can really create havoc. You can actually detect it in some of the molecular tests that we're able to do. You can see evidence of those happening in the past. And one thing that I probably should have pointed out, there are more turtle species that are extinct now from natural processes than there are living, because there are many families of turtles that became extinct hundreds of thousands, millions of years ago. But that was a natural process. The rate of extinction today is so much faster. Yes, sir.
That's kind of my question to you. With turtle species going back 200 million years at the rapid rate of extinction, now would turtles be fine if it wasn't for us?
Yeah, that's something that I often tell people. I often make the comment, turtles survived the asteroid that caused... Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot. So the question is, turtles have existed a long time. Would they continue to exist if it weren't for us? And the point that I often make is they survived the cataclysm that caused the extinction of dinosaurs, but will they survive us? And I think that's a real poignant question. Because if you look at the reasons why turtle populations are declining, it's the same list of things that are causing biodiversity loss in general: habitat destruction, pollution, overutilization for food, pets, medicine, whatever. It's exactly the same thing that's causing problems throughout the biosphere. Yes?
What's the process for on a desert tortoise to absorb the energy from the sun and become more active? Without getting too technical, I guess.
Okay.
How does that work?
So the question is, how does the desert tortoise basically warm up from the sun to become active? Reptiles need to achieve certain body temperatures to initiate various bodily processes like digestion, reproduction, egg production, those sorts of things. And being ectotherms, their metabolism is different from ours in that they're able to tolerate wide variation, but they can also behaviorally change their ability to absorb heat by crawling out of a burrow on a sunny day and then going back in the burrow or under the shade of a bush. So they're trying to moderate their temperature like we do. The metabolism we have is called homeostasis. So when our fever goes up like 0.2 of a degree to 98.8, we don't feel very good. That's a very, very narrow threshold, right? Tortoises have, and turtles have the ability to undergo what's called anhomeostasis, which means the opposite of stable, everything calm and good numbers. They can withstand fluctuations of some of their blood parameters that are 1,000-fold. I mean, it would kill a mammal or a bird within minutes. So turtles have an amazing ability to tolerate environmental extremes, but they do try to moderate by getting warm when it's warm outside and cooling off when they get too hot. They can't sweat. Yes?
Are there any success stories where populations are a long time stable or rebounding?
Well, there's a couple of exciting things happening in the Galapagos. Some of you may have seen on the news recently that they just discovered a tortoise on Fernandina Island, which nobody living has ever seen. There are tortoises in museums that were cataloged from that island over 100 years ago, and they thought that they were all extinct, and they just found one. They're doing genetic tests to make sure it's the right kind, because we also know that some ships would load up with tortoises on one island and then get heavy and drop them on another island. And good news for Lonesome George is that colleagues of mine were doing surveys for tortoises in the Galapagos, and usually each island has its own unique shape to a Galapagos tortoise. Some of them are helmet-shaped. Some of them have what they call saddleback shape, where they have a really raised front part of the shell to allow the neck to reach up really high to get some of the tree cactus pads. And they noticed that on this one island, they had both shapes. And they thought, that's really weird. They shouldn't be here. And they tested the genetics and found out that some of those tortoises were hybrids from Lonesome George. And so what they've concluded is somebody loaded up with tortoises on Pinta Island way back before Lonesome George was probably even born. And then for some reason, they dumped them overboard or they escaped or something like that. And so they've combed that island looking to see if any of the parentals are still there, because they found F1 hybrids, which means they're really hot on the trail. So it may be possible, if they can back cross those hybrids in 1,000 years, maybe we'll have another Lonesome George. Yes, ma'am.
I lived on the island of Mauritius for a while, and I wonder if you go back to the dodo bird turtle connection.
Yeah, so I think it's a palm, and I would murder the name if I tried to pronounce it, but I'll try because maybe you know it. It's like the Tambo Lecoq palm tree, something like that. And yeah, a couple of papers have been published that implicated the dodo bird as necessary for germination enhancement, that the seed had to pass through their guts before it would germinate. And the plant apparently in the pollen record was very common at about the time the dodos were still around, but it became rarer and rarer after the dodo's extinction. But it was concurrent with the extirpation of tortoises on that island, and they think the tortoise was probably the more important germination enhancer now. Did you hear any of that when you were over there?
Not at that time.
Okay. Back there.
There's a tortoise that's on display in YouTube. And they claim that it's an alligator snapper. It had musket balls lodged in its body from the Civil War. And evidence being it was at least 150 years old. Have you heard of that?
So the comment was that he saw on YouTube that there was an alligator snapping turtle somewhere in the southern U.S. that had musket ball lodged in its shell. I've heard that story several times over the years. I used to live in South Carolina and Georgia, and I don't believe it. Yes.
Over your years of research in the leopard turtle and tortoises, do you think that it's getting better?
Do I think what's getting better?
That their decline or cumulative is it on the rise, or are they just continuing to be wiped out without regard?
So the question is, during my long career, have I seen things get better? No, I have not. However, there is a bright spot. I just wrote a paper in January that was published called "Where Has Turtle Ecology Been and Where Is It Going?" When you get to this age, you can be philosophical about stuff. You know, I tend to look back and think, you know, what's all this mean? What have we really done? Anyway, one of the things that we documented in that paper is that there was a birth of turtle conservation in 1990s, formation of the Turtle Survival Alliance, the Turtle Conservancy, and various others. I could go on and on. There are all these organizations out there that are trying to do things, some of them different than others. Some emphasize leaving turtles alone in the wild. Some emphasize setting up captive breeding programs, putting them back out. Others say, no, 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 bring them all in. That's the only way we're going to protect them. We need captive husbandry. But these organizations are really getting strong, and they're getting a lot of members, and they're doing very important things. So let me give you a couple quick examples. About a year and a half ago, there was a huge seizure of, I think, 8,000 Philippine forest tortoises or turtles, and there was a huge international response where the Turtle Survival Alliance and other conservation organizations rushed to the Philippines to do triage on all these turtles, which were held in abysmal conditions. They were basically put into what looked like a giant dumpster that was this deep of turtles crawling all over each other, some of them dead, you know, some of them injured. And they were able to treat all of those turtles and release them back into the wild, except for a handful that died. And then twice in the last 2 years, thieves have stolen huge numbers of radiated tortoises in Madagascar. One group you may have seen on the web where the thieves put them in a house in Madagascar. No food, no water, no air conditioning, tortoises crawling on top of tortoises, dead, stench of death all through the house. And again, a huge international effort sending veterinarians and vet techs, and those tortoises have now been repatriated into the wild. So people are really trying to turn this around, but the odds are really, really high. Yes?
Looking at this picture, what are the turtle eyes like? Are they trichomats? Is the retina inside out, or like ours?
So he's asking the question, what are turtle eyes like? They're basically like ours, but turtle eyes are fascinating. When I went to Morocco in 2008, I went in quest of a blue-eyed turtle that lived in the Sahara Desert and found it. And they had beautiful eyes that were just sky blue. Some turtles have red eyes. One thing that's really neat about turtles that I just learned last year from my wise PhD advisor and still mentor and friend is that the turtles that have the black stripe that goes horizontally through their eye, if you rotate the animal, the stripe always maintains its horizontal position. I have no idea why. I just learned that last year. So I'm still learning. Yes, in the back.
This part of the West has gone through a lot of development pressures, and the dells nearby is a pretty unique area. Are there places to get inventories where we can see that we're looking at trying to protect an area? How do we find out what's there that needs to be paid attention to?
So the question is, how can we access information on what species that perhaps might be of conservation concern, occupy certain regions we're interested in? First thing I would do is check a resource called VertNet, V-E-R-T-N-E-T, which links all the databases from hundreds of museums around the United States, and you can put in keywords like genus, species, state, county, various other things. It's a huge search engine, and you can find all the historical records that exist in museums. That's a great starting point because there's a lot of specimens in museums all over the country. As far as another resource, I would say contact Arizona Department of Fish and Game. They may maintain database on those sort of things. I know California has a database called RareFind or NDDB, Natural Diversity Database. You have to subscribe to it to get access to it, but they have huge numbers of records of animals all over California. I don't know if Arizona has that or not. Yes?
I'm a complete beginner, and I don't know the difference between a tortoise and a turtle.
That's a really good question. What is the difference between a turtle and a tortoise? Any animal that has a shell and a backbone is a turtle, regardless of what you call it. You can call it a terrapin, you can call it a tortoise, but it's still a turtle. Just like a fox is a dog and a lynx is a cat, a tortoise is a turtle. A terrapin is a turtle. Any animal with a shell and a backbone. So if you really want to give your friends something to think about at the next cocktail party you go to, tell them that all tortoises are turtles, but not all turtles are tortoises. So there's 14 living families of turtles in the world, one of which is called the Testudinidae, and those are the true tortoises. And one of the features that separate them from all other turtles is the fact that they have elephantine hind legs. It almost looks like a stump. They don't really have well-developed toes or webbing or anything like that on the hind foot. The front feet can be heavily flattened and modified for digging like on a desert tortoise. But there's some other differences as well, but a tortoise is a turtle.
I have a question about that.
Sure.
I thought that the tortoises had much bigger domes, and the water turtles had a much shallower dome on their back, and that tortoises cannot go in the water, where turtles can live on land and in water.
Well, Leanne raises a really good point. She's basically saying that tortoises are more domed than turtles, and tortoises don't go underwater, which is definitely true. Tortoises float. That's how they got to the Galapagos and Aldabra and Mauritius. But look at your pancake tortoise and compare it to a box turtle. Box turtle is a semi-aquatic species that has a highly domed shell, and the pancake tortoise is a real tortoise. It's in the family Testudinidae, but they have a flat shell. So. But as a rule, tortoises definitely tend to have greater carapace height, but there are exceptions to every rule. That's the beauty of ecology. Yes? Oh, Leanne, you got one more?
Oh, well, just heard that.
We'll talk later. Yes, sir.
I was told that turtles have cells underneath their shell such that they can sense or feel if you're just stroking the top of the shell.
So the question is, can turtles feel when you're touching the top of their shell through special sensors under the top of the shell? No, but they definitely know you're there. Turtles have a very primitive hearing system. Instead of having an inner ear and outer ear and all those little bones and stuff, they actually have what's a bone called a columella that almost looks like a long funnel, like somebody in the 1800s would use if they're hard of hearing. So they're very good at hearing low frequency sounds, vibrations, thunder, deep voices, trilling, shrill voices, not so good. Yeah. Okay. How long you want me to go? I'll go all night.
How about two more?
Okay, go ahead, ma'am.
Several years ago, we found the Sonora mud turtle.
Sonora.
Mud turtle
Mm-hmm.
in Dewey.
They're there.
They are
Yeah.
okay.
That species is semi-aquatic. They like water, and they'll live in water year-round if they have it. But if it dries up, as many intermittent streams do in Arizona, they will estivate. They'll crawl under a rock or get under the mud or something and wait for the rains to come, and then they'll reinitiate activity. They can do that for a long time.
Last one.
Yes, sir. I didn't hear that.
What's the most cruel, but apparently benign thing you can
So I think I hear, tell me if I'm wrong, but you're asking what's the most cruel thing you can do to a captive turtle? Take it out of the wild. If you want a turtle for a pet, there's the Tucson Herpetological Society, the Phoenix Herpetological Society, California Turtle and Tortoise Club. They will be glad to adopt a turtle or a tortoise to you if you have interest in maintaining one as a pet. There's lots of unwanted turtles and tortoises in the world that they make great pets, and they may inspire somebody like me at 6 or 7 years old, and they may become the next turtle biologist.
That's a good job. So as a federal government employee, we can't pay Jeff, so we're going to give him a small token of our appreciation the Natural History Institute hat.
Thank you. I'll wear it proudly.
You all are welcome to stick around, go into the gallery, and chat with Jeff if you wish. Thank you for coming out tonight.
And I have a select handful of papers up here if anybody's dying to read it. Hey, nice talking to you.
I liked your scientific